story. I told you I thought I'd be a neurosurgeon. Since the 6th grade, I studied. I remember when I got my acceptance letter at Princeton, I met my advisor. I sat her down. I said, look, these are the classes I need to take across these next 4 years so I can become a neurosurgeon in the next Ben Carson. And she said, Chris, welcome to Princeton. It's okay. If you have a little fun. I said, yeah, but I have to do this because I knew the importance of having parents who had not gone to college. And I knew the importance of parents who grew up in the Jim Crow South. I knew the importance of my grandparents who could not vote at one time, who were called boy and girl. I knew those stories of the color line. I lived with them. But even in my own sense of stick-to-itiveness, I encountered failure. I encountered disappointment. I encountered setbacks. I did not match in neurosurgery. Duke couldn't believe it. Duke called Johns Hopkins and said, what happened? Johns Hopkins spoke to the people at Mass General and said, what happened? How did Chris not match? It was in that disappointment that I had to find the fiery resolve to endure, to go west, to go out to UCLA. They all said it was a fluke. Take a pre-residency spot at Hopkins or reapply. And I got good advice. Don't take the pre-residency slot. Go out west. What I did not know is that when I went out west, I would have an epiphany. And I would understand that I wanted to doctor and heal communities in ways different than a neurosurgeon. I believe the things that happened to me were a part of my path of becoming. And I share that to you, yes, and I share that with you because everybody doesn't talk about their failures or their disappointments or their setbacks. Look, I stayed up later than anybody else. I volunteered for more cases. I had all the right answers. I was trying to flip chairs of departments at Duke University School of Medicine, and I did not match. I graduated with an honors thesis, and I did not match. But it was there in that neuropathology conference on the wall with my pager going off at UCLA Hospital that I got giddy, that I heard a voice that says, you don't want to be a neurosurgeon. And I said, what? How could I not want to be a neurosurgeon? I'm fight the power Chris. I'm fight the status quo Chris. I've told everybody, you don't want to be that. Give yourselves permission to be the you that the world needs. And I began to reflect on my father, a grass cutter at Bell Labs in Murray Hill, that has come up with so many advances that we now take for granted. I remember at my 8th grade graduation, my father, Clyde Bethia, saying to me, oh, you want to do neurosurgery? Someday you will use a laser. You won't even have to use a scalpel because they had all of this technology. They did the math for Easy Pass. My father was a part of the teams that did call waiting, caller ID, three-way call, and this man never went to college. He started cutting grass at Bell Labs, but became a member of senior technical staff. Those are the stories I want you to remember, because as you remember those stories, when adversity comes or when adversity is presented in the lives of your patients, you will be able to have empathy, and I dare say it is the greatest skill to have. It took me a while to figure out who I would become in medicine. I graduated in 2003, and it took me a while to figure out who I would become in medicine, but I had to keep close to my heart the core skills that as a human being I knew I possessed. I got very sick. I have postural orthostatic tachycardia. The fact that I stand here and I'm not the one passing now is my own miracle. I got so sick when I was at UCLA, I could not drive. they told me over and over again, Chris, you're going to have to leave training. I was like, no, I'm going to stay in training. Until my cardiologist said, if I get paged from you passing out at another place in this hospital and hitting your head and becoming a liability, I'm going to pull you out. But that's the same cardiologist who did not believe me at first. That I had to take, I heard that, yes, I had to take a journal article into my doctor's appointment. The same doctors who said, oh, it's all in her head, as my heart was racing from a seated to a standing position to 160 beats. Those are the things I can't forget because they allow me to connect with my patients, with communities, with people who are othered. And I dare say, you have a story. And if you never forget your own story, you can never neglect, devalue the stories or ignore the stories of other souls. And I say people are souls because I told you I'm a preacher. I will never forget my father or my mother who had a PhD in love and showed me how to love people who don't look like me, who don't love like me, who don't believe like me. I mean, her kitchen. People could tell my mother things that if I told her, I was like, how is that so? I will never forget my grandparents. And I will leave you with a story of my maternal grandparents because it is my Nork story. Because all of you will go to various places throughout this nation. Some of you, thankfully, will stay here and will train here. And I'll see you at University Hospital, the blessed hospital, where I have the privilege of working for the people every day. But my father, my grandfather, Reverend Harrison Gregory, and my grandmother, Inez Boswell Gregory, came to New Jersey from Virginia in the 1930s to stay with my grandfather's brother, son. They lived on 219 13th Avenue. My twin aunts, who are now 84, I no longer have my parents. I lost my father in this pandemic. That's why I'm known nationally, because I just kept speaking. Some people wanted me to be quiet. But I already told you who raised me. How could I be quiet and turn my back on a father like that? My twin aunts were born at the predecessor to the predecessor hospital of University. They were preemies in 1937, and they survived. And they became a part of my fabric of the Nork story, that indomitable spirit. And I dare say, if you train here, you have part of that indomitable spirit. Don't forget it. I don't forget it. I don't forget it as my mother tells me the stories of coming up north to be with her big sister, because the family went back and forth from Virginia to New Jersey. My mother finally coming back around 1958. And coming up north and witnessing the 1967 Newark uprising and seeing the rebellion just right with her very eyes, she would describe it. And she's like, I'd never seen anything like that before, but I understood the strife that had produced it. Never forget. Because these communities across these United States are continuing to be shaped like stories such as those, and they evidence themselves in morbidity and mortality in your treating room. You have a duty to learn, to remember. You have a duty to disrupt, to better, to improve, and transform the system of care and the systems that shape that system. If you can remember the power of your own stories and recognize the power of everyone's story, then human dignity and human lives begin to more than matter. They become of the utmost value. Some of you will lead in traditional ways. You will seize the opportunities that are presented. For those of you whom opportunity does not knock, or it knocks very timidly. For those of you, though you are an MD, still find yourself disempowered and disenfranchised, like I found myself carrying a journal article for other physicians to believe what was happening in my own body. To those of you who are among what we call those historically excluded groups, Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, Native and Indigenous populations, the challenges and the barriers that provoke you, they will prompt you to lead. But everyone can lead because there is situational power. But with power comes responsibility and accountability. You must share power. You must share power. As physicians, you share power with your patients through shared decision-making and believing and seeing and validating their stories and their truth. You must share power with the communities in which you have the honor and the privilege to train. You must share power among your colleagues and peers, because we must build diverse, equitable, and inclusive pipelines. But to share power, we must recognize our privilege and our biases and use that privilege to break the system and to demand change and to disengage and disarm our biases, to enable, to enliven, and enact justice. So I salute you today. I celebrate you today, and I dare you never to forget. I dare you to remember the story of my father who left his life in this pandemic. I dare you to remember the hopes and the dreams of my grandparents that sent them to Newark. I dare you to remember your immigrant stories, your refugee stories, your stories of discipline, your stories of tenacity, your stories of perseverance. I dare you to empathize, to be human, to always remember we are all a part of the human family. And then, and only then, can justice roll down like mighty waters. I thank you. I am in awe of you. I am counting on you. And I promise to lead alongside you. Thank you.
Dr. Pernell, please come. We want to present you with this token of our appreciation for being our Convocation speaker for 2022. And I have to tell you a little story about this award. Typically, the dean invites a speaker, and we've had convocations here every year since I've been dean, and then we present the dean with this award. Early in my time as dean, I invited Ben Carson. And now you and Ben Carson, you want to take it? And I have to tell you, he didn't get a standing ovation.